Are you a CEO looking to scale your company faster and easier? Check out Thrive Roundtable. Thrive combines a moderated peer group mastermind, expert one-on-one coaching, access to proven growth tools, and a 24/7 support community. Created by Inc. award-winning CEO and certified scaling-up business coach Bruce Eckfeldt, Thrive will help you grow your business more quickly and with less drama. For details on the program, visit eckfeldt.com/thrive. That's eckfeldt.com/thrive.
Hey everyone, Bruce Eckfeldt here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications so we can let you know when the next video is posted. You can also check us out at eckfeldt.com for more great content. With that, let's go check out the video.
You're listening to Thinking Outside the Bud, where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, thought leaders, researchers, advocates, and policymakers who are finding new and exciting ways for cannabis to positively impact business, society, and culture. And now, here is your host, business coach, Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome everyone, this is Thinking Outside the Bud. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt, I'm your host. And today we're here with Dr. Jonathan Vaught, who is CEO and founder of Front Range Biosciences. Jonathan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, it's nice to be here.
So why don't we start with just a little bit about your background, sort of professional and how you got into cannabis, and then we can talk a little bit about biosciences and what you're doing in terms of the science behind a lot of this stuff so that we can better understand, how do we best use cannabis from a business and kind of a industry point of view.
Yeah, certainly. So my background, and I'll try to keep this as brief as I can, but I do have an interesting path as to how I got here.
Yeah.
So my background is I have a BS in chemistry from North Carolina State University. I have a PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and spent most of my career in the molecular diagnostics world. I started out while I was in graduate school and got the opportunity to work on a technology platform development for a startup company in the human diagnostic space here in Colorado, a company called SomaLogic.
Okay.
And I actually was able to put together a lot of the core pieces of the technology as a graduate student, and got one of the first papers and patent, and then I went to work for them as a full-time scientist. And the company was focused on human diagnostics, and so we were looking at the human proteome, which are proteins that make up the human body, basically, and how we can use those to predict disease outcomes, improve personalized medicine, targeted treatments. Spent a lot of time working directly with pharmaceutical companies, and a lot of it was to develop assay technologies that would support FDA submissions for clinical trial work and support, improved treatment outcomes with data that backed up, how certain medicines work. So I spent about 6 years there, helped them grow that company from 20 people to over 120. We got to tens of millions in revenue, and really great way to launch my career. And then I got recruited into another molecular diagnostic startup company, but in a very different world, the food safety space. And they brought me on to help develop technology for detection of pathogens like Salmonella, Listeria, and E. coli in large-scale food processing.
Yeah.
So I spent a couple of years, this company was called Beacon Biotechnology. I spent a couple of years there, and I was building basically a new device that would sit on the factory floor of large food processing facilities and allow the factory floor workers and personnel to run these fairly sophisticated tests that traditionally had been run in a laboratory, but be able to run these on site there. And so it was a big effort in technology development and then manufacturing and how to make this new instrument and get it out into the market.
Interesting.
It was a great experience. My first exposure to big agriculture for sure, and a great learning experience and a great stepping stone in my career. And then I went to help start another company called Velocity Sciences with my former PhD advisor that was back on the human side. And we were doing more intellectual property development, very similar to the type of work I did at SomaLogic, working with pharmaceutical companies, working on things just like we did at SomaLogic, like cancer diagnostics, heart disease diagnostics, trying to improve, just the industry's ability to improve treatment outcomes and predict disease outcomes and things of that nature. I spent a couple of years there, and while I was there, I started watching the cannabis industry flourish here in Colorado, and I had always been interested in agriculture, and certainly medicinal plants are kind of the foundation for most pharmaceuticals, actually.
Yeah.
So that's where most of the compounds come from. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of pharmaceuticals actually come from plants,
yeah.
or at least natural products from plants. But anyway, so I saw cannabis as an interesting business opportunity. I evaluated our ability to work in that space at that company, but given the regulatory hurdles and the legality status at that point here in Colorado and federally, it just wasn't a clear path for us to do any work in that space. And so I decided to go out and start Front Range Biosciences. And that was about 3.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as a little side note on my background, during this time, I was actually at Beacon, actually at a couple of other companies. I had started a nonprofit in Boulder called Mountain Flower Dairy. It's a 501c3 goat farm that did a small micro dairy, and they did a raw milk share for the community.
Oh, interesting.
Summer camps and workshops, really to help educate people on where their food came from.
Yeah.
And, this was partly my response to, just learning more about the agriculture, the big agriculture and food production world, in terms of...
Exactly. I'm sure they're seeing that process being made.
Yeah, being in it firsthand. And so, really wanting to give people a chance to learn what it really takes. And, a lot of people don't realize that milk doesn't come out of a bottle, for example. And so it was a lot of fun, but I also kind of fell in love with farming. So I spent nights and weekends doing this as kind of a side project and doing everything from building fences and building barns to wrangling goats and nursing or dealing with nursing goats and babies. And so all of that really, that kind of combined with my professional career in molecular diagnostics and working with drug companies and even food companies, it really catalyzed the motivation to starting Front Range. And so to finish it up, I started Front Range. I met my co-founder, Nick Hoffmeister. He's actually an MBA out of MIT, and he has a similar startup background experience to me in the biotech world, algae biofuels, nutraceuticals, but very much from the business side with his background in business and finance. And so we made a great team, and we started putting together business models, evaluating the regulatory and corporate structure that would allow us to build a company in this industry. And then we went live. We incorporated at the end of 2015. Mm-hmm. And then we started raising money in 2016 and started operations in August of 2016. So we just celebrated our 2-year anniversary, and we basically set up Front Range Biosciences to translate existing agricultural technologies into the cannabis space. But then also more broadly, we saw the opportunity to innovate and use the type of technology that we'll talk about here in a minute in other crops as well. And so it's turned into much broader than just cannabis. So we currently have 3 crops. We work with cannabis, which we include 2 crops, industrial hemp and then marijuana or high THC cannabis. Yep. And then we also work in coffee currently. And we might take on additional crops, but those are the 3 right now that we work in. We have facilities in Colorado and in California, and our business is really focused on 2 areas, our clean stock nursery program and then our varietal development or breeding program, which is really about understanding the cannabis genome and the plant genome and using it to improve our ability to breed. And so that's really us in a nutshell. And a lot of it is driven by a fundamental technology called tissue culture, which is how we actually propagate our plants in a clean room type environment and are able to certify them as part of our clean stock program. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure you've got some questions.
Yeah, no, lots of questions. And I like the whole kind of your background of looking at sort of agricultural and human science and sort of application of effectiveness in medicine and effectiveness in agricultural production, because I think that's, as we're looking forward in this cannabis industry to more kind of larger scale production, the whole question of how do we really grow, at scale, a reliable, consistent, dependable product is actually, it's problematic. I think a lot of people have struggled with this, going to scale. We can grow a lot and we can grow well, but growing a lot well is a tough one to get right. So just so I understand, so it sounds like, are you ultimately your customers are growers who are looking for different varietals and looking for different science and approaches to the actual growing process?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I mean, I think we're a B2B business, and our Our customers are certainly growers, farmers of these different crops. And, our main way we interact with customers is through our nursery. And so we use our nursery to supply them large quantities of plants. So, for hemp, let's take hemp, for example, we work with a lot of hemp growers here in Colorado, and we'll deliver during the spring, large volumes of plugs or plant starts or clones of a specific variety. Then they go transplant into the ground. And these could be large acreage, hundreds, up to some folks are now doing thousands of acres in industrial hemp. And so we supply them the plant starts so that they can really stay focused on production. And, our goal is to provide the highest quality at scale. So the ability to actually produce hundreds of thousands, even millions of plants and deliver those in a format that gives them what they want in terms of crop production. And we also are working on seed too. We will eventually be doing some seed, especially in hemp, but seed takes a lot longer. You really have to do a lot of validation work and testing and breeding to actually get what you would consider stable seed that could be certified.
Got it. So your facilities basically look like very, very high-tech growing facilities where you're doing the starts and then packaging them up in various ways to then deliver them on site to growers, to farmers who then actually plant and do the actual growing and harvesting then.
Yeah, exactly. To get a little more specific, there's two parts to our facilities. The first is the tissue culture lab, and this is a laboratory environment. It's you can think like a clean room type environment for manufacturing. Actually, not so different than what you might have for certain types of manufacturing environments. And that's where we work on producing the plants in tissue culture. And then the other part of our operation is the greenhouse. So we move plants from the laboratory to the greenhouse through a process called acclimatization. And then once we get the plants into the greenhouse, then we get them ready for production so that we can deliver large volumes of plants to growers. So that's really the core of our operations. We have that set up for hemp in Colorado. We also have a small scale TC lab that we work with a partner here in Colorado on the marijuana side. And then in California, we have a tissue culture lab and a greenhouse in Gilroy, California, where we do our coffee propagation and our coffee work. And then we also are in construction of a tissue culture lab and greenhouse set up in Salinas, California, that will be operational later this year, that serves marijuana growers and farmers.
Got it. And that's, obviously with the various sort of legality of THC-based products, cannabis products in different areas and interstate transportation, all that, you've got to set up these different facilities in these different states to be actually serve these local farmers, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, we regulatory is a whole separate discussion, but yeah, our goal, one of the things that I think I bring to the industry is, given my experience working in regulated environments. So everything that I did in human diagnostics, I've been through audits with pharmaceutical companies because all of their data gets put to the FDA, which means it has to be, there's a process of quality control or quality assurance system called GMP, or good manufacturing practice. That's something that you hear a lot of, especially in pharmaceuticals and molecular diagnostics. And so, I'm used to working in regulated environments, used to working closely with regulatory to make sure that you are compliant. And it's not only about, serving the regulatory body, and, it's really about consumer safety and really making sure that, what you're putting out in the marketplace is safe for consumers, because at the end of the day, as a company, you're liable for what you put out in the marketplace. And even if something goes wrong and it's not your fault, you can still be found liable. And, you can see that, there's certainly lots of cases over the last 20 years, things like food safety outbreaks, right? And, some producer of a vegetable or crop ends up getting, sued because they made, 100 people sick, and, they didn't realize that. I mean, there's all kinds of stories like that. And then, certainly when you go into things like nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals, where you've got potentially, drug-like compounds that have strong effects, right? At the end of the day, you're responsible for what you put out into the world. So we take it really seriously, and it's and we have a very transparent policy of transparency with both regulators and with customers. Yeah,
I think that everyone seems to be struggling with this whole kind of effectiveness question, both in terms of the products that are produced and the consistency of the production. And I think that a lot of what's happening, kind of grow chain side is, how do we start with the right material, produce it in a consistent way, process it in the same way, put it into a consumable form and know that it's going to have the effects, the ultimate, medicinal effects that we're looking for, depending on the patients and the people taking it. So, I think this is the start of all that, making sure we're starting with the right, fundamentals before we go into the growing process. I mean, just to contrast this a little bit, right now, if we're traditionally, how does a grower actually go about this process, and how do you change that for folks? Like if someone's starting to grow, they'll go out and they're finding seeds, and they're starting with seeds and starting the process that way. Is that what it is right now, or that's how most people do it?
Yeah, so it really depends on what, on kind of what market and what industry you're looking at. So hemp and marijuana are, a little bit different, but in general, from a high level, they're both very similar in a lot of ways. And so generally people either start with seeds, or a lot of people will start with clones. So people have maintained a clone line, which would be a parental plant, like a mother is typically what they would call them. Sometimes those have been maintained for years, even decades.
Yeah.
And they'll simply take cuttings and provide those to a new grower or a new farmer. The advantage of that is typically, when you clone from something, you already know what to expect. Whereas with a seed, you have to grow it up and evaluate it, because right now there is no certified seed. Well, there's a few examples of certified seed now in hemp, but that's it. And even then, the availability of the different varieties that you might want to grow there's not a lot of variety of certified seeds. So you're kind of limited in what you've got there. So seed really has a lot of challenges currently, and I expect it'll take another 3 to 5 years before that really gets solved, because that's really how long it can take of specific breeding practices to actually generate stable seed product and other things. Yeah. And that's compared, this is a short cycle crop, so you can get several cycles a year. Yeah. But, when you compare it to some other crops, and you look historically, it's taken a decade or more to get stable seed of a new crop. And sometimes people are still working on it. And it's really a longer term process. And in the interim, and that's why we really focused on tissue culture cloning and the ability to produce high quality, large quantity of, the exact same plant. Mm-hmm. That's why we went down that path, because I think it really serves the needs of what growers have right now. And we'll need that for quite some time. And so that's really been our focus.
So how much of this is technology around and kind of process around how to quickly produce enough product of a particular varietal or of a particular type, versus looking at new types and sort of increasing your product line? Where are you generally focused?
That's an interesting question. I'd say the industry is moving so quickly that and there's a lot of existing varieties out there that cover the different types of traits or, products that you'd want out of this plant. Mm-hmm. And so we generally, we have, everything from, we just simply go purchase something on the open market, such as seeds or clones, and then we get it into the nursery and characterize it and propagate it, all the way to licensing deals where we in-license some unique variety that somebody's spent, several years working to create, all the way to we're working on creating our own varieties through our varietal development program, and we're evaluating, those new varieties for how they perform as well. So it kind of spans the whole range, but we're constantly trying to evaluate what's out there and then what we can get into production, because at the end of the day, our number one goal is to help improve a farmer's bottom line, right? So they don't have to worry about, characterizing these plants. They don't have to worry about the nursery side. They don't have to worry about clean, healthy clones and producing hundreds of thousands or millions of them. We take that off their plate for them, and they focused on what they do best, which is how to produce their product, right? And they get the genetics, they grow them, and then they can actually stay focused on production. We're certainly evaluating a lot of new things on a regular basis.
Yeah. What's the market like and your competition like in this space? Are there other companies that are, filling this need or solving this problem for growers, or are you unique in this?
Yeah, there's two answers to that question. I think from a nursery perspective, there are certainly other nurseries, especially in California, where agriculture has really been the dominant industry there for, a century. And so there's certainly other nurseries there. Even in Colorado, where agriculture is also a pretty big component of the industry here, there's some nurseries in Colorado as well. So in that regard, there are certainly some nurseries, although not a lot of focus has been on the nursery industry at this point, or the nursery part of the supply chain. It's more been on the growing and production and the product side. And so, but we're starting to see more folks enter into the space. But then the other side of that is almost none of them have tissue culture. So tissue culture is a pretty challenging process. It requires PhDs and then not only PhDs, but people experienced in production agriculture, because at the end of the day, a lot of people use tissue culture as a research process, and we certainly do that too, but our main focus is to use it for production. And that's a different, it's a different set of challenges. It's one thing to produce a few plants in tissue culture, but to be able to reproducibly make hundreds of thousands or millions at scale is really a very different proposition. And it requires a lot of labor, it requires the right facilities, the right technologies from a process perspective. It requires quality control system and all of these different pieces. And so I think that's the big differentiator for us, is that we use that to produce higher quality plants that can be certified virus free, that we produce pesticide free plants. So we really are focused on what we would consider, in quotes, cleanliness of the supply chain, starting at the very beginning, which is the nursery.
So, and at the risk of kind of getting into a lot of scientific detail, just give us a sense. So when we talk about tissue culture propagation, like what is the process, from a kind of production point of view? Like what level are you dealing with the plant? What process are you putting it through? What does it really take to make this work for the application that you're looking at it in a scale point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I'll just talk a little bit about the two different crops, because I think it illustrates how tissue culture is applied to different, different plants. In coffee, for example, really quickly, it's a very different plant. The way we propagate it is very different, and we actually go through a process where you use what's called callus, which are what a lot of people think of in tissue culture, which are these basically plant stem cells, if you will, that are grown in petri dishes, and then they can even be put in bioreactors, and eventually you can turn these into plants. In cannabis, we use a process that's called micropropagation, which is where we're actually not using callus material and there's a lot of reasons why, but at the end of the day, you're really using very small microcuts. So, very small subsections of the plant. So nodes, if you will, where you have new growth coming out of the plant. And then that's where we propagate from in the tissue culture lab. So when you think about tissue culture in cannabis, it's really, and whether it's hemp or marijuana, it's really, for production, it's micropropagation. And micropropagation is really very, very similar to cloning or cutting or vegetative propagation in the greenhouse, only it's done in this clean room environment. And there's some differences for sure, but it's, from a process perspective, it's very, very similar. And then one last piece to add to this is a lot of people go, well, is this genetic engineering? And it's like, absolutely not. This is really just a very highly controlled, clean process for doing propagation in a laboratory environment, so that your plants come out of the lab completely clean. And so it doesn't involve any type of genetic manipulation or anything else. It certainly does allow you to make sure that your plants are uniform, right? So that we have a quality control, and that's all part of our clean stock program, which is what we call true to type testing. So we make sure that every batch that comes out, we test some of those plants to make sure they perform as specified and they haven't undergone some type of change or they don't have some problem. Because mutations happen in tissue culture, they happen in the greenhouse, they happen in vegetative propagation. That's just part of biology. Is that plants evolve and mutate.
Interesting. Where do you see this industry going? So if we're kind of, I guess we're always kind of at a breaking point or at a tipping point in the cannabis industry, but we're certainly seeing a lot more states, a lot more countries start to go both legally and recreationally, or medically and recreationally legal. Demand seems to be a bit out of an upsurge. Where do you think the industry is going to go in the next couple of years? Where do you think the challenges are going to be? I mean, you're certainly at an interesting one, which is the whole, how do we get enough product into the market? How do you think that's going to play out, or where do you think the challenges are going to be in the coming years?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always impossible to predict the future, but, I think the way we view the world, we see cannabis as, one of the world's next commodity crops. I mean, it has got applications in everything from industrial use and fibers and even potentially plastics, on one end of the spectrum, all the way to, pharmaceuticals. The first CBD, plant-based CBD drug was just approved by the FDA and is going out in the market this year in the United States, Epidiolex. And so, that's the other far end of the spectrum. So that's a cannabinoid-based drug that's gone through the full FDA, approval process to get out in the market. And so we think the industry is really going to begin to segment into these different spaces. And I think about it as pharmaceutical, nutraceutical, then even functional food. So I think hemp protein, it's got the seed produces a very good protein source. It's got a set of balanced amino acids for the most part, a balanced set of fatty acids. So omega-3s to omega-6s, the ratio is actually just about right for humans. So anyways, it's got a lot of beneficial effects. I think hemp protein will see as the supply chain scales and the genetics improve over time. I think we'll see that become a big vegetarian protein source. And then moving down into just all the leftover fiber from the biomass and the plant stalks and all of that, there's already applications of hemp fiber and everything from, clothing to even in construction, building materials. And so, it's been kind of a sleeper on the industrial and food side, for many, many years because of the federal prohibition kind of around the world, actually, on cannabis in general. But I think we're going to start to see more and more of that part of the industry evolve as well. So from our perspective, it's going to touch all of these different spaces, and that's going to require different growing and production methodologies for each one of those segments. It's going to require different technologies. It's going to require different genetics or varieties that serve each of those industries. So when we think about it from a high level, that's what we see happening over the next, 5, 10, 15 years. And we see it just scaling incredibly across all of those sectors. And then, actually, I should add recreational too. That's the other piece that kind of fits in the nutraceutical realm. Yeah. But, just like alcohol and tobacco, the recreational market is also going to be another huge segment of this, which is kind of separate from the other ones. So anyway, so you add all that up, and then you've got it happening around the world. And I think you've got a recipe for a pretty, fast growth industry for quite some time. I mean, we've seen a growth rate of, about 29% sustained for, a few years now. And sometimes it even seems like it's going to increase some. Yeah. And so, the future looks really good from that perspective. And I think the challenges that you're going to see as it goes down these different paths and segments out across these different spaces is really going to be related to supply chain. And, one of the things that happened early on because of the regulatory environment of this industry is companies were forced to start out vertically integrated because of the trying to maintain, tight regulatory control of the process. And so they had to they had to get their own seed and clone, or the nursery side, all the way through. They had to grow everything, then they had to extract it, and then they had to get their products ready, then they had to get their products out to customers through dispensaries. And that actually doesn't really exist in other industries. Vertical integration happens at the end of, or later stages of a company life cycle, not at the very beginning, because, as you're a startup company, it's really hard to do five things that are hard and challenging at once, right? And so that's one of the reasons that we focus our company really laser sharp onto the nursery part of the industry so that we could really do a great job at that. And down the road, we might consider other parts of the supply chain, but we really think that staying focused on that. And as the regulatory environment evolves, places like Colorado and now California and in all the other states and in different countries, it's opening the door for countries to really focus in on their part of the supply chain and then work together contractually, just like you have in food, agriculture, nutraceuticals, all of these other industries, so that, you can actually really do a good job at addressing the supply chain challenges and then scale it up effectively and still maintain quality, consumer safety, and all the things that really matter in the marketplace. So I think that's really going to be the biggest challenge. And then the last one, I think, is just setting expectations, because this is agriculture. And, people somehow seem to think that, in 6 to 12 months, you can start a large agricultural operation and it's going to be successful. The reality is that plants take years, and to get things fine tuned, they're living things, and there's just things that go wrong, right? You have natural disasters, even in a controlled environment like an indoor greenhouse. In California, they're seeing wildfires, right? Nobody can control that. And they're even causing problems for indoor growing spaces because of the air contamination and things like that. And so, and then you go all the way to someplace like Colorado, where we get crazy freak snowstorms sometimes in the middle of the spring. And then we get tornadoes or hailstorms. And, these types of things can just wreak havoc when you're growing plants, even if you do all the things you can to control the risk factors. So I think setting expectations with investors and just across the industry, so that everybody's not running so fast that they forget important things, which leads to bigger challenges like consumer safety issues and other things because everybody's trying to go fast. So I think that's the other challenge, is just being able to manage expectations and grow as quickly as possible, but also maintain safety, regulatory compliance, and all of the other important issues that consumers care about.
Yeah, and I certainly see, a lot of conversations happening these days around, looking at that issue of growth and, how do we maintain the kind of reliability and the predictability of the supply chain as this industry really kind of grows, and how it's going to be segmented, like which products and which crops are going to, develop different supply chains and why and how, and, obviously legislation and legality of things are playing into that as well. So I'm curious to see what happens over the next couple of years in terms of all this. Jonathan, this has been great. I've learned a lot about kind of the early part of the whole supply chain. It was really educational and interesting for me. I appreciate the time. Thank you for being on the program.
Yeah, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I'd be happy to join again sometime if you need it. So yeah. Thank you. It's been fun.
If people want to get a hold of you, learn more about Front Range, what's the best way to find out more information?
Yeah, certainly. Our website is the easiest, www.frontrangebio.com. You can also email us at, you can email me directly if you like, jvaught, VAUGHT, at frontrangebio.com. And but yeah, we have website inquiry forms on our website, and so that's certainly the easiest way, to inquire about specific things, like availability of our nursery and what we do and things like that.
Perfect. I'll make sure that those are in the show notes so people can click through and get a hold of you and find out more. It was really a pleasure. Thanks again for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
You've been listening to Thinking Outside the Bud with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at thinkingoutsidethebud.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at thinkingoutsidethebud.com/newsletter.